Find other great podcasts like this one at podmoth.network.
Podmoth.
Dans notre au quotidien, c'est sur Terre.
Located on the edges of your radio static, you've stumbled upon The Lost Signal, your podcast destination for tales of horror and the macabre, brought to life with voice acting and sound effects. New episodes are released every 2 weeks on Monday on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Join us, won't you?
Hey, Twisted Listeners, I'm Cindy.
And I'm Diva.
And this is Twisted Listeners, a podcast about murder
And Liz.
And we're brought to you by the Podmoth Podcasting Network. They're amazing. Check out all the other shows. This is going to be, as Lyndon from Murder at Bedtime with Lyndon always says, no waffle. Diva and I have had, Diva's week has been crazier than mine. Mine's actually been pretty chill. And so we don't have a ton of time tonight. So we're going to keep it tight, like the haircut, high and tight. Get it done quick.
My brain feels like a little bit of like a scrambled egg, kind of maybe an over medium.
I think
still
that's
yolk.
fair. I think that's
Yeah.
fair. The fact that you're waiting on a work call at almost 8 o'clock at night,
Yeah.
it feels
Yeah.
traumatizingly familiar, but I'm very
Yeah.
glad. I don't really have to do
Normally-
that anymore. So, but I remember
Normally
the
I'm
time
like
when I did.
Normally I'm like, Cindy, how could you possibly fucking be taking work calls and texts right now? And then I'm doing it. I can't believe I'm doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
but it's okay.
I generally am done. That's a lie. At this time of year, I'm done on time. As it gets crazier, then it'll be like 7:30 and I'm like, I gotta stop. But anyway, I feel your pain. And
I did recently have a 7 p.m. on a Friday Zoom recently, though, and that was because it was with someone in Beijing.
I was gonna
So-
say, if they're not in this country, I'll give them
Yeah.
a pass. But if they
Yeah.
are, they can fuck off with that noise.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
It's a wacky time differences.
Yeah, people will like put 4:30 on my calendar, and I'm like, "Are you crazy?" I take the call, but I'm just, I'm
That's rude.
spoiled now. I'm spoiled now, not having 8 o'clock calls.
I have a theory that nothing should happen after 3 p.m. on Friday. Like no meeting. Like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, okay. 3 o'clock, no.
Yeah, that feels good.
No,
Yeah.
you're done. That's like you're mentally already halfway out.
Yeah, agreed. So I lied. We're going to talk a lot about not the pieces.
All right, a tiny waffle.
A little waffle. All right, we're going to get into it. You know where to find us online. Join us on Patreon. We love you all. Like, rate, review, and share. Thanks. All right, who goes? This is part 2 of The Husband Didn't Do It. And who goes first?
Think you do, and then me.
Yeah, okay, so I'm going first. All right. So this story is really fucking sad because it starts off really cute and wholesome, and then ends in murder, as you could probably guess. This is the story of Terry and Roxanne Wood. This takes place in 1987 in Niles, Indiana. And I would like to say, I think this is 3 out of 3 cases for 1987. So
Wow.
I don't know when your next case takes place, but if like we've got a hat trick of 1987 here, which is
Mine's late 90s, so not quite.
God damn it, we ruined it. Well, anyway, number 3 for 1987. It was a year for husbands being blamed for murders. So listen carefully when I tell you that Terry Wood and Roxanne Woods met while Terry was still in high school and Roxanne had just graduated. Roxanne Woods was working for Terry Wood's father, and Terry came in one day in his wrestling shorts, and the rest, according to family, was history. Roxanne said that he had the nicest pair of legs she had ever seen.
Well, I mean, yeah, wrestling.
Yeah, and the two fell madly in love, and that was kind of it. So Roxanne here was the oldest of 3 siblings. She had a younger sister, Janet, and a younger brother, Brad. Their parents divorced when Roxanne, I believe, was in high school, and her siblings both said that she became like a maternal figure for them. She provided something of like a stable and safe home life when it may have otherwise been very tumultuous due to the parents divorcing. Terry and Roxanne were married in 1982 in what Roxanne told her sister was the happiest day of her life. And like I said, we have Terry Wood and Roxanne Woods. So her maiden name was Woods, and she married somebody with the last name Wood. So
that's crazy.
Isn't that weird? She just had to.
They should have hyphenated it and been Woodswood.
That would be really cute.
Woods.
It comes back a little again later, and if you ever, there's like interviews with her family, and the last names get so confusing, and I'll explain why. But I thought that was super cute. So Terry and Roxanne lived and worked together at Terry's father's company. Terry's brother also worked there. But it began to be too much for them to always be together. So Roxanne, who went by Rock, because as the family said, she was the rock of the family, decided to get a job in South Bend. And this really helped their relationship flourish because they got a little bit of time away from each other. Now, I've heard people be like, oh, South Bend is super close. I looked it up. It's fucking really far away from Niles. So I don't quite know how this works, but supposedly she was working in South Bend. Anyway, so the couple, they're like this beautiful power couple. Roxanne is like tall. She's pretty. She's always dressed to the nines. Terry looks like, I don't know if anybody knows Billy Madison, but the character Shooter McGavin, he kind of like looks like that guy, like that actor. So kind of like an all-American, like, golf guy, like white guy, but like good looking, so they're this really good looking couple. They're super happy, especially since they stopped like working together and spending every moment together. They're very young though, so there's something to be said for that. They had been married 5 years, and I think at this time neither one of them was even 30, right? So they got married like not right out of high school, but they started dating while Terry was still in high school. So definitely a young couple. But really happy. Again, Rock was like very maternal to her brother and sister, so they were always around the family. She just kind of created like this beautiful family unit, right? So now we're at February 19th, 1987, which is in 4 days, February 19th. And Rock and Terry met up for dinner after work, then went to go bowling at a local bowling alley. Now, this alley was mostly full of men this night because it was the men's league bowling. And like I said, Rock was really pretty, really tall, really well dressed. So she drew a lot of attention that night. Yeah. Nothing weird happened, but everybody who was like interviewed said that she definitely like kind of made waves. So she and Terry had a lot of fun, but around midnight, Rock decided she wanted to go home, and Terry was like, no, I want to stay and bowl and drink a little bit more. Yeah. So as they'd driven separately, this wasn't a problem. Rock went home, and about 45 minutes later, Terry followed her. When Terry arrived at home, he found a horrific scene. Rock was dead on the ground inside the house with a large cut across her throat. She had also been beaten on the head with what was later determined to be a frying pan. Terry panicked and went to her body to see if she was still alive. And he like cradled her head in his hands and did the whole like upset husband thing, right? Which, like you would do.
Or that's an organic, natural thing to do.
Yes, absolutely normal fucking reaction. He was also just checking to see if she was alive, right? And he realized she was not alive. So before he even called 911, he already knew that she was dead. And so he called 911 And the first thing he said was, my wife was murdered. My wife was murdered. She is dead. She has been cut. And when you read that, it's kind of weird, but I actually was able to find and listen to the 911 call. This man is fucking hysterical.
You can hear it. Yeah.
You can hear the genuine. And like, there are sometimes like when you watch like the staircase and whatever, and people are like, it's hard to tell if that 911 call was fake. I think dude did it. And if you listen to this 911 call versus the one from the staircase, you can see the difference. Like, you hear the difference. I mean,
for sure.
Like, there's a definite difference between them. So anyway, as the call continues, Terry starts to get irate, and he's like screaming and swearing at the operator. He's like, get fucking 50 cop cars started. And they're like, they are started. And he's like, no, they're not. Yeah, right. And he's like mad. And you can just hear he's basically like, fuck you. And I think it's misplaced anger because he's upset that his wife is dead. But I also want to shout out to Terry because he basically from that moment was like, fuck the cops. And I was like, that's fair. If you're going to be angry, feel free to be angry at the cops. So he's like, you know, the officer or the caller, the 911 operator is like, sir, when you're screaming like that, it distorts the phone and I can't hear you. And Terry's like, you're just trying to get this on recording. Like, you're trying to get a recording of me. So he's immediately already thinking like, I'm a suspect. You're going to come after me. And whether or not that's fair, it is kind of like makes you suspicious. You know what I mean?
Yeah. To be already talking about that in that way.
Yeah. But to be mad about it right off the bat, they're kind of like, why aren't you just like taking the time to mourn your wife? So that was a red flag for them. And also, once they took him down to the station, they actually had to subdue him in the cop car while they were at the scene because he was so belligerent with first responders. So they take him down to the police station. Why can't I speak? Like, I can't think of anything. I'm like, the office. They took him down to the office. What office? Oh my God.
Just an office.
An random fucking office. They took him to his office. No, they take him down to the station and they want to interview him. And he's like, I want a lawyer. I'm not talking to you until I get a lawyer. So there's another red flag. But I do want to point out that he cooperated fully. He answered all of their questions. He never refused an interview. He just wanted counsel there because Terry's no fool. And he probably knew that he was going to be a suspect. And honestly, part of like the way the story goes, I think in large part is due to him being so careful from the outset. So you know what? They can find all of this to be a red flag all day and night. I think he acted properly, right?
Yeah.
Very intense though. Rock's sister Janet, who when you listen to interviews with her, her name is Janet Wood. And you're like, well, if Rock's maiden name was Woods and her married name is Wood, then how is her sister's name Wood? Well, that would be because she ended up marrying Terry's brother.
Oh my God.
Also changed her name.
So much wood. So much wood. Okay.
I believe that they actually married after Rock's death also. So that's an interesting little tidbit. Anyway, she said that on the morning of the murder, one investigator said to Terry, I know you did this and I will not rest until I see you behind bars. And if somebody said that to me while my dead spouse is on the floor, I would be irate and uncooperative as well. And I would want a lawyer right.
That is fair. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, again, no fault to Terry. Like, I think he acted completely within his rights, and I totally understand being upset and angry. So now the cops are investigating. They're trying to put the pieces together, and they decide the main conclusion is that the only suspect is Terry. Now, this is despite there having been a clear rape. Her underwear were on. She was in her nightgown when she was found. Her underwear were down around her ankles. And there was semen on her body. Yes.
Okay. And can they test it?
That's right. So in 1987, I don't think that they could. Or if they could, they couldn't. It wasn't as definitive back then, right? But they decide that's not the smoking gun either way. They're like, okay, she was raped. Maybe Terry raped her. Like, who knows? You know, like we can't say maybe he staged it. Whatever, right? And one reason they may have ignored this evidence a little bit more was that during their investigation, which I will say was focused on Terry, They found that both Terry and Rock had been having, or at least at one point had, extramarital affairs. So,
Okay.
and I'm going to stop right here and say that I'm not really surprised by that, nor do I think it would have ruined their marriage. Because, like I said, they got married very, very young. They were both good-looking people. I don't think it's cool that they did this, but when you're young and immature and you want to see what's out there and make sure that you didn't make the wrong mistake getting married so young, it's an
Yeah.
understandable thing.
And even if they were about to break up or they had a horrible marriage, doesn't mean that he killed her.
Right.
So.
But it seems as though they both knew about the other's infidelity and were clearly attempting to mend the relationship.
It wasn't
And-
like a source of recent fighting or shock or
No. And again, like her family, his family, everybody is like, they were fine. There was no abuse. There was no nothing. But the cops are like, look at how fucking crazy this guy is. Clearly he was abusive to her. Clearly he's a violent man. And everybody's like, dude, his wife, he found his dead wife 30 minutes before these interactions. Like he's not going to be, you know, not just not acting in on his best behavior, but probably not even acting in a way that he's ever acted before or will ever act again. I mean, I think it's fair to give a lot of room in those situations.
Yeah.
So basically they're like, this affair is motive, and you know, the semen not being Terry's could mean that it was an affair. And it's like, well, it's found on her body. Like, come on. And to me, that's the smoking gun. But I don't know. They also noted, the last thing that cops noted as being like the reason why they thought it was Terry is that there was no sign of forced entry into the home. So they're like, if there's no forced entry, you know, how did they get in? And Terry's like, well, we've actually been having issues with the lock on the back door, which is probably how the intruder got in. And remember that I said that they did have an unlocked back door.
Okay.
The police also noted that the murder weapon, which was never found, came from the house. And it was a fillet knife. The sheath was left in the kitchen. And they're like, well, that's really weird because most murderers bring a weapon. But I think you and I, and anybody who knows anything about true crime, know that's not actually true.
No, it's rare, but it happens.
Look at Richard Ramirez. I mean, it's definitely a thing that fucking happens. Anyway, there's a couple other things. Terry said he slipped in her blood, but they didn't see a sign of him slipping. But also, like, why would that mean he was a murderer? I don't know. There's a lot of weird little speculation.
Just tiny little discrepancies that could mean something or they could not.
Yeah, and that they really focused on. To me, it's like he was probably just having a trauma response and not remembering perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, you know, the whole thing is also ridiculous because they probably could have figured out when she died and ruled him out because he was at the bowling alley with witnesses, you know? He came home 45 minutes later and she had probably been killed prior to that, you know, while he was still there. I don't know. Anyway, I understand the suspicion, but I think a lot of the evidence points to it being someone else. Him having an alibi, there being semen, there have been a rape. The cops did not agree. And this case is different than the others in that they never actually arrested Terry, but they did put all of their suspicion onto him. And the case went cold while his life was essentially destroyed. He chose to never leave his hometown and instead, still to this day, lives and works there. I think he's fairly successful, but he's had to deal with the rumors and suspicions and all this shit for years and years and years. Apparently, he would walk into places and people would greet him by calling him Slash.
Oh, gosh.
That's disgusting. Like,
that reminds me of Ash versus the Evil Dead, which we just watched, you know, where they call him Ashy Slashy as like a way to make fun of him for having purportedly killed his girlfriend when it was actually demons.
Yeah, so kind of the same thing. I wonder, like, I mean, obviously they didn't get it from this case or anything, but I wonder if they like read something and, you know, based on that. Yeah, that's so fucked up. People can be so fucking cruel.
Yeah.
So he had a really bad reputation around town. Like I said, like, I think a lot of his reticence to like do interviews or talk to anybody is because of the trauma that he has surrounding this case, because he was hounded by the police, because he was the only suspect, even though he's going, please look into other people, please look into other things. Like, this wasn't fucking me. Years and years go by. In 2000, they did reopen the case. It was not fruitful. 2001, apologies. They had the DNA. They couldn't find any matches. They couldn't figure anything out, right? Then in 2020, they decided to try again, and this time they took a different approach. They brought in students from Western Michigan University to help with the cold case. Their professor, Dr. Kirsten, and the lead detective at the time came up with a plan to create a digitized database compiling all of the information regarding the case. There were thousands and thousands and thousands of pages, and it was all paper-based, right?
Okay.
So this database streamlined the process of searching through suspects and information. So they were able to kind of like look at the DNA, look at the suspects, look at who they'd interviewed, kind of look not just at Terry, really. It was a little bit clearer picture, kind of looking at everything all together, not having to like sift through file cabinets to find one thing. Despite this, they were still having difficulty finding their suspect, even with the DNA. Now, this is despite bringing in genetic genealogists to try to find a connection to the DNA from the semen because it wasn't in any criminal databases. Terry continued to wait for news on the case and dealt with the suspicion and just tried to live his life as best he could.
Just push through. Yeah.
Yeah. The one nice thing is that her biological siblings, believed that he didn't do it. So at least it wasn't like her family coming after him. But it was basically like the whole town, and for
everyone
a while,
else. Yeah,
it was a big case for a while. I don't believe he ever remarried or had kids, which is really fucked up. So anyway, we have this DNA, we have this profile, we don't have a match. And one of the reasons that they were having such difficulty finding a match is that the DNA sample was extremely small. By the time they were able to test it, it was about 3% of what they normally need to test.
Okay. Little microscopic blip.
Microscopic, like absolute fucking blip. Then in 2021, 34 years after the murder, a genetic genealogist from Northern California, our girl, we're both from there basically, a woman named Gabriela Vargas, who worked for the company Identifinders, was given the DNA from the case. This was after two other genetic genealogists from this company called the case, quote, unsolvable.
Oh, because of the crappy sample?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It took her 4 days to find the family.
Wow.
Yeah.
Some people are good at their fucking jobs, man.
Yeah, she's a fucking badass. And you see her, she's got like pink hair, and she definitely looks like she's from like the Sacramento area, like no pink at all. Like I'm from the Sacramento area. I never had the Sacramento eyebrows. But
you did have pink hair.
She did. Yeah, I love that for her. And for, NorCal.
Anyway. No, I said you used to have pink hair.
Oh, me? Yeah, no, I did.
Yeah,
but I never plucked my eyebrows down to like little tiny things. That's a very like Sacramento girl thing. All my friends had that. I didn't.
Interesting.
Yeah, I know, it was weird. 90s. Anyway, so she found the DNA for this family. There were 3 brothers, each of whom had equal chance of being the murderer. However, 2 of the brothers had no criminal record and had not been in the area at the time of the murders. One of them lived in South Bend and had a real big, long fucking criminal record.
Interesting.
This man's name was Patrick Gillum, and in 2021, he was 67 years old and I believe still living in the area. He had a long criminal record, like I said, and at the time of the murder, he was out on parole after only serving 6 of a 14-year sentence, and we'll talk about what that sentence was for in a minute.
Okay.
So now the police have a viable suspect, but his DNA was not in the system because back then, I guess, you didn't automatically get put in. So he'd been involved in a violent attack against a woman named Maureen Farrig in September 1979. So 1979 to 1987 is basically the amount of time it took him to get convicted, go to prison, and then get out.
Okay.
Maureen was a married mother of 2 and lived with her husband in Gary, Indiana. Patrick, she stumbled upon him like rifling through her purse in her home. So he was burglarizing her home and was like startled by her. So he attempted to rape her, but failed when Maureen fought back. He did steal her credit cards, though, and those were found in his possession about a week later during a traffic stop. And that is how he got caught. So one of the reasons that I wanted to say, remember what I said about the back door, was that on the night Maureen was attacked, she had unlocked her front door because her husband had forgot his keys and asked her to please, or it was a side door, please leave the side door open so that I can come in, because I guess he was coming home late. So she unlocked the side door, and instead of her husband coming in, this motherfucker came in, just like he did in Rock and Terry's house using the broken back door. So very similar. So the cops need his DNA. They don't think they can ask him for it because he's probably not going to give it to them. So instead they set up like a weird sting where an undercover cop starts talking to him outside of a laundromat while he's doing his laundry and smoking a cigarette. They pick up his discarded cigarette butt and test it.
I love that true crime move when they go in the trash, and it's so fun.
The craziest thing is they did it one time before, but picked up the wrong cigarette butt and tested it, and they're like, it's not a match. And they were like, did we get the wrong fucking cigarette butt? So they go back and do it again. This time there's no fucking question that it's his, and it's a fucking match. So they bring him in and they interview him, and he says he doesn't remember. He doesn't know how his DNA got there. He asked for a lawyer, so obviously he remembered something. I also wanted to note that he claimed that he blacked out when he attacked Maureen as well. So apparently this guy just has blackouts where he attacks women, right?
Okay. Yeah, very convenient.
Yeah. And also his murder of Roxanne Wood took place just 4 months after he was released. So super fuck this guy. I'm also surprised that they haven't tied him to anything else, because it's like, if he attacked her within 4 months of being released and then what, for the next 34 years was just like chill.
Sounds like he can't like murder fast enough. He's just like, he's like, he's excited about it.
I'm wondering what else he did. But police decided to give him a plea deal because the case wasn't super solid because it was so old and they weren't sure they could get him for first-degree murder. So they spoke with Terry, and Terry signed off on the plea deal, wherein he got a minimum of 23 years for second-degree murder. And at 67 years old in the condition he's in, just looking at him, I don't think he's going to make it out alive. No. If he does, he'll be 90. I don't think he's going to hurt anybody else.
Yeah.
So, Terry had to sign off on this, and he did. I think he was just really, really happy to put this behind him. I know Rock's family was really happy to put this behind him or behind them. Like I said, there's not a lot of information from Terry directly. He's really stayed out of the spotlight on this. He doesn't want to do interviews. He doesn't want to be involved. He just fucking wants to be left alone. And hopefully now that he's in his fucking 60s, it's been not even a year since this happened, or a little bit more, I guess. Hopefully he can fucking relax a little bit,
Yeah, the emotion that must come with that finally being like, the release of like, see, motherfuckers, like,
yeah, like I fucking told you so.
Really didn't do it.
Because the cops were like, oh, well, the DNA doesn't match. Even after they found out the DNA didn't match him, they were like, well, that doesn't mean he didn't kill her. Like, she could have just had sex with somebody else. And it's like, so she had sex with somebody else on the floor of her kitchen, and then they it was obvious that it was a new semen stain. It was connected to the crime.
And it would nothing brings consensual about how that was found.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the whole thing was really annoying to me that they were just like, well, it seems pretty obvious it wasn't him, but we got nothing to go on, so we're just gonna ruin his life for fucking 35 years,
Yeah.
Pretty fucked. That was the case actually that inspired this list. So
okay, perfect.
Yeah. What's yours? Sorry, I tried to get through that fast because I know we're trying to make it happen.
No worries. It's like, it's cool that you had one that was like someone who just lived with suspicion, because all the rest of them are kind of exonerations. So it's a little different.
Yeah, for sure. Tell me about yours, because I know you said I was going to be mad.
You will be mad several different times.
Good.
Throughout this. Yes. So this is the case of Rodney Patrick McNeal and his wife, Deborah Blackcrow. This happened in 1997 in Highland, California, which is a suburb of San Bernardino County, which is way east and a little bit south of LA, out in the desert region-ish. Just geography, Patrick was a probation officer in Highland for the county. And Deborah Blackcrow, his wife, was an Oglala Lakota woman who was formally enrolled in the Oglala Sioux tribe of South Dakota.
Nice.
She was super proud of her heritage. I wish I had a little bit more about her personally, but I'll be cheesy as fuck and say she was really beautiful, because she was. She had 4 children from a previous relationship, and she was also 6 months pregnant with Patrick's daughter.
Okay.
So number 5. She was having a girl, and she was going to name her Samara, which is really sweet.
Cute name. Also very sad, considering.
Yeah, it is. So Patrick, she had known Patrick for less than 2 years in total. So they obviously, this is a pretty expedited timeline, right? They'd probably gotten married at least within a year or so. Pretty quick.
Yeah.
So I will talk about this again, but basically their marriage wasn't 100% great, and Patrick is no saint here. There were domestic violence charges that were set against him because of him abusing her. There were several times cops were called for quote-unquote domestic disputes to the house. That will look bad for him later. Obviously, that's a big strike against your record, and either way, it's not great.
Right.
So I believe what alerts people to come to the house is actually like a neighbor. I wrote this down wrong because he does not find Deborah at home. There's something, or no, he does. He says he does. This is so weird. Anyway, I'll circle back to the weird part. I'm just gonna push forward. Okay. So Patrick finds his wife Deborah dead in their bathtub. Yes. He comes home from work. She's floating in water. She like face down.
Right.
And he says he pulls her out of the bathtub. She had been strangled, stabbed, and beaten.
Oh, God.
She's a pregnant lady. It's fucking horrible. Her official cause of death was strangulation. The house was also ransacked, and furniture had been slashed. Just a house had just been mangled for some reason. A shelf had been knocked over, and there was a prominent trail of blood from the living room to the bathroom, as if she had kind of been dragged, or there was a struggle going from one place to the other.
Okay, so obviously something crazy went down.
Yes. So Rodney, or Patrick, falls under suspicion because of this history, right, of domestic violence, domestic disputes. That's kind of like, duh. They had firearms confiscated by the police from the home, so he's got several different kinds of strikes against his record.
Right.
Deborah had also previously filed an injunction, which I don't know what that means against someone. It's like a restraining order?
I think so, yeah, probably similar, which is weird because weren't they living together at the time?
Yeah.
That's a pretty gnarly, that's
Oh no, it's an authoritative warning or order. So it's not exactly the same as a restraining order.
Okay, but it's basically like, I'm telling on you to the police so they know that something's going on.
Official strike on your record.
Right.
Sorry, but she was filed an injunction, but she was actually denied it, interestingly. So she tried to do that and failed at one point. Another strike against him is that days after Deborah died or was murdered, Patrick filed a $100,000 life insurance claim as a sole beneficiary in a life insurance policy. So that's obviously like, oof. But it was after, at least, question mark. It wasn't like one of those ones where they take out the $1 million like and calculate it, you know? Yeah. So people basically theorized that he returned home. This is kind of like the middle of the day. He returned home to take her to a doctor's appointment, and they argued, leading him to kill her in a crime of passion.
Okay.
So
I mean, I feel like that's fair given the background.
There is. So here's some problems. There's some big problems with the theory, despite the fact that there are some things that make it sound good.
Okay.
So the biggest issue, I would say, there's a couple of biggest issues. One of them is that witnesses and phone records put Patrick at his office until 12:15 p.m. And he arrived back home by 12:30. And with the traveling time, he only had about 2 minutes before police officers arrived. Okay, and so that's why when I started my story, I was like, wait a minute, how is this possible? Because who called police? So someone else must have called police.
Right? Because they showed up like right away.
Unless he called and they came within 2 minutes. That seems quite fast.
That could happen. Right. You know.
Someone else must have called. Someone else who was alarmed or something. Okay. I don't know.
Yeah. Either way,
maybe someone was concerned. Maybe someone was like calling them to do a check on her.
Yeah, maybe they heard. You know? But also, like, regardless of who called, the window of opportunity is like big. And provably so.
Yes. I don't know who called it in, but he says he comes home and finds her. The cops come 2 minutes after that. And the fact of when he arrived can be proven because we know when he was at work.
Right. So
and we know how long it took.
No time for him to do all of the things that happened to her. It's just not possible.
There's a lot of ransacking. There's a lot of murdering. Strangling itself takes like a few minutes, right?
Like up to 7. Yeah.
And he attacked her in multiple different ways. There was all the ransacking. I've also seen other reports say, quote unquote, less than 10 minutes. And I think that's because the window is 12:15 to 12:30. But even that is like pretty tight considering he had to come back from work. right?
Right. And also, like, so what were they, like, arguing at work and he was mad enough to, like, drive home and attack her? Or did they get, I mean, here's the thing. If they're like, oh, it was a crime of passion because he was angry, he's angry enough to drive home from work and stay mad enough to murder her, like, the second he walks in the door.
Right.
Or they got in an argument that lasted 10 seconds before he attacked her. The whole thing is like,
That's the latter
stupid.
is what they say. So they basically, the reason he was coming home in the middle of the day, if you're like, well, why was he coming? It was to take her to a doctor's appointment because she's fucking pregnant.
Yeah.
And that's why he was coming home. And so they say that he went home to do that. They got in an argument and he killed her. But the argument would have had to be like a second long.
Yeah, it would have had to have been like, okay, the amount of rage to like murder your pregnant wife who's pregnant with your child. I mean, obviously people who murder don't need any fucking excuse for it. They just do it. But the idea that you're going to get that angry in what, 2 minutes? Like that's not.
And this is not a premeditated murder by the way it went down. This is heat of the moment, sloppy.
Right.
So yeah, so that's the very few couple minutes he had is concerning.
Right.
In addition to demonstrably like not being there at the time of the murder, he also had no blood on his clothing. So he would have theoretically had to like clean up and completely obliterate those clothes, which weren't found if he did change.
This guy's like, what do they think? He's like, sorry, I have a 7-year-old when I say this reference, but is he like Sonic the Hedgehog or something? He can just like move super fast. Like he can stop time. He's moving so quick. Like,
and after that violent of an attack, you'd think he would have some fucking blood, right?
Something.
There's stabbing, there's beating, right?
He'd be wet. Like he'd have like there'd be all sorts of like he would be like soaked. Like this is ridiculous. The whole thing is dumb.
Right. So there were also unidentified hairs and fibers found on Deborah's body, and interestingly, I'm going to do a spoiler alert because this will come back in a big way in a minute, but one of her daughters, who's like an adult, obviously now, Chantel Haynes, she is very vocal that Patrick is guilty and did this, and she kind of flips this around and says, the fact that this is a quote, I think, from one of her petitions saying he did it. The fact that he did not have any water or blood on him when he stated that he lifted Deborah out of the water and blood ran down her face from her nose because her nose was broken.
Right.
That's suspicious. But I'm like, wait a minute, hold up. If he doesn't have water on him and he doesn't have blood on him, that fits with he just came home from fucking work. You know,
and even if he pulled her out of the tub, she's
not going
like,
to be soaked.
Yeah, and she's not like actively bleeding either. He could have pulled her out by her armpits and like
and you don't get soaked with water from pulling someone out of water.
No, as somebody who, again, referencing my 7-year-old, I pull his ass out of the tub all the time. If I get like, a couple drops on my feet, it's like, that's it.
Exactly, but you would be soaking wet if you were strangling someone who was flailing in a bathtub.
Yeah, fuck yeah.
That
and you'd be covered in blood, spatters all over you. There's no way that wouldn't.
But she admits he had no water or blood on him, and I'm like, actually, that looks bad for your case that he's guilty. But she's using that as like, well, he said he lifted her out of the water, and I'm like,
oh, he must have changed, is what she's postulating. Where'd the clothes go that he changed out of, or like what?
I don't know. Yeah.
Or is it just not a point? Well, he said he lifted her out of the water and he must not have. It's like, well, what is that? Also doesn't prove his guilt. I don't quite understand her angle.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting.
It's weird.
All right. So in 2000, the next following year, Rodney, or I'm calling Rodney because I wrote it wrong halfway through, Patrick is convicted on 2 counts of second-degree murder.
Wow. Also, how do you get 2 counts of murdering one person?
Because of the fetus.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So he gets 15 years to life for each, and for a total of 30 years to life.
Because basically. They're served consecutively.
Yeah.
Not concurrently. Okay.
Yes. So his case eventually, well, actually pretty early on in its time span here, gets the attention of the Innocence Project. Yay.
Okay. Yay. Woo-hoo.
In 2006, they actually file a petition for a writ of habeas corpus proclaiming that Rodney's half-brother, Patrick's half-brother, Jeffrey West, was the real killer.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. So they cited the fact Jeffrey West was convicted of remarkably similar murders in Nevada in 2005.
Oh my God.
The year before. So that kind of helped, I think probably helped him come to their attention.
Yeah.
And he had also, according to one of his friends, confessed to them to killing Deborah in graphic detail.
That feels like a slam dunk right there.
He described beating her unconscious, dragging her to the bathroom, which checks the evidence, right?
Yeah.
And he even said that he knew Patrick was innocent and serving time. And I just didn't care, right?
And so the Innocence Project is like, hey, here's this really obvious answer to this situation. Why don't you look into it? And I'm assuming that just doesn't happen.
And they had not one, but two reported confessions from Jeffrey in this Innocence Project dossier.
What the fuck?
They got the friend, and he and Patrick's shared half-sister, Ebony, also came forward and said that Jeffrey had confessed to her too, and she had lived with agony and hated carrying this knowledge, but she was so scared of Jeffrey because he was a fucking scary ass guy.
Mm-hmm.
She was scared of what would happen if she ratted him out, that he would come after her. So they have two full confessions that are detailed, that match the evidence from two separate people.
Right. Wow.
Despite this evidence, and despite the fact that none of what I just said, those two confessions or the crimes of the half-brother, none of that was available in the original trial, right? The Superior Court judge declines to reverse his conviction.
Because the Superior Court judge is a piece of dog shit.
Yes. So,
yes.
Get ready. There's going to be a moment here where you get really mad, but it's going to be a roller coaster. Every sentence I say is going to be like,
Okay, great.
Up and down. So March 2020. So he's in prison for
Jesus Christ.
20 years by this point.
Yeah.
20 years. September 2020, following an apparently rare tie vote. So it was hotly disputed and barely came through. I skipped an important step here. Okay. March 2020. Boop, 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 boop. Remember that month? Remember that special month? March 2020.
Yeah. COVID times.
Month. So March 2020, California Governor Gavin Newsom actually granted a clemency petition that Patrick and his lawyers put in, which basically did nothing. Well, it didn't do nothing, but it changed his sentence from 30 to life to 22 to life, which meant that he could get parole.
Okay.
That's all it did. Didn't grant him release. He just got parole.
Okay. So, but it moved up the timeline at least. That's such a Newsom non-action. Look, I'm doing something. It's no, you didn't really do much, dude. That's ooh.
Yeah. So Deborah, they requested it. It's not like he did it out of the blue.
Right.
So Deborah's family, especially Chantel, was really mad about this. They were mad that they weren't informed. They kind of gave many, many statements. After this decision, the San Bernardino DA gets together with Chantel, Deborah's daughter, to very vocally protest Governor Newsom's quote-unquote commutation of his sentence, which is really not at
all what it was.
Commutation. And the DA for San Bernardino website is intense. There's this picture of Chantel with a framed picture of Deborah, right? And it says called Justice's Last Stand for Deborah Marie Black Crow.
If you think he did it,
yeah, it's very much, I think they're using it as a tool against Gavin Newsom, right? Also, if you didn't know it, guys, San Bernardino is very conservative.
Extremely.
So anyway, so the website says there's a podcast, not a podcast, a radio show that's the title headline that they have on there is another friend of Gavin will be released, so they're trying to use it to stick it to Gavin Newsom.
God.
The family says the fact that Patrick had a degree in criminal law and a background as a probation officer meant he knew how to quote unquote work the system. There's also outrage from various sources from South Dakota Indigenous leaders, people involved in missing and murdered Indigenous women. And look, on this podcast, we've done extensively talked about this issue. It's a very serious issue, as is Deborah's murder. But you definitely get the sense that they're just kind of knee-jerk flipping out because it is an Indigenous woman who's being murdered, and the convicted killer should stay behind bars, period. And it's no, we also want it to be the right convicted killer, not just a person convicted.
Yeah, you can't conflate those things.
Right.
It is very important to give the proper weight to the murder of Indigenous women. It's very important to give the proper weight to the murder of women in general, to victims of domestic abuse. Absolutely. But if this guy didn't do it and there's proof, or not proof, but good evidence, good suspicion that it was somebody else, that is a separate issue. They are not the same issue and they need to be looked at. And the other thing is, if these people want there to be justice for her, then they should want the right person to be in prison. Because right now, if the wrong person is in prison, then there is not justice for her and her case is not being taken seriously.
And also, it's the same oppressive white supremacist settler colonial systems that fucking make MMIW and Indigenous violence against Indigenous women a fucking crisis are the same systems that put Black people in jail when they don't belong there.
Exactly. So it is the same issue in a way, because they're both suffering from like systemic racism.
Indigenous people, I'm sure, are also in prison for things they didn't fucking do. You know, so it's like,
for sure,
let's have solidarity across the fucking shared struggle. And if you're also Indigenous or Black person allying with like a very conservative DA, you might like reconsider your fucking like priorities, you know, like
because like, that DA
honestly,
is not doing this for the reasons that you want them to be doing it for. They are not your friend. They are not your fucking ally.
No, Santa Bernardino DA does not give a fuck about Indigenous rights. They're just co-opting this to get this person, to keep this person behind bars and never have to admit that they were wrong.
Right, exactly.
Which they never will anyway. But even when people are exonerated, the DAs still don't admit that they did anything wrong.
They just double down, which is so fucking pathetic. It's like, grow the fuck up. Grow up.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's frustrating to see. And it's really, it's very fascinating to see, but sad.
Yeah.
So, September 2020, following I started to say this earlier, following an apparently rare tie vote that was very tight, the parole board actually votes to release Patrick McNeal.
Wow. So he isn't exonerated. He's just released.
Released on parole in September 2020. So, get ready for this sentence. I'm going to watch your face explode. But due to the pressure from Chantel and the family, in 2021, Governor Gavin fucking Newsom reversed his parole.
What the fuck? I hate Gavin Newsom. God, I fucking hate him so much. Oh my God.
Going out of his way to individually make it so Patrick was behind bars.
Why is Gavin Newsom such a piece of shit? That guy, he is just such a slimy, smarmy fucking weasel.
And the fact that he also was the one to allow him to get parole, like he approved that himself the year prior.
Oh my
and then
fucking God,
he gets so much heat and pressure from the family that then he's like, oh, never mind.
I'm going to put you back in prison for no reason after releasing you?
Reverse the parole.
Fuck you, Gavin Newsom. I hope you don't listen to our podcast, but I hope somebody fucking plays it for you. Fuck you. You're the worst. Oh my God.
Yeah. So I actually thought the story ended right there, and I was about to be like, wow, this is the saddest story I've ever told. However, there is a happy ending. Have hope. Because because following a parole reversal by the governor, he was actually owed a new parole hearing. So it's kind of like a board game where you're re-rolling it, you know, like,
oh my God,
because he gets one more free chance at it where it can't be reversed. So it was like, okay, parole. Gavin Newsom said, no, you don't get parole. And then it went back to the parole board for one more free chance.
And so the parole board can overrule dumb asshole Newsom.
Yeah, it goes back and forth. God. And on October 28th, 2022, just last Halloween, the parole board again voted to release Patrick.
Jesus Christ, for a crime he did not commit.
And Patrick was freed, having served 25 years in prison. He was freed despite Gavin Newsom trying to stop him.
Fuck you, Gavin Newsom.
And
why don't you fucking cure our forest fire problem instead of lying about the funding, dick? Sorry. Political.
That's a whole other podcast. We should do a special Patreon bonus episode on why we hate Gavin Newsom.
Oh my God. How many hours you got? Jesus. Okay. Anyway.
So Patrick McNeal was the 38th inmate freed by the California Innocence Project since its founding in 1999.
Was he really freed by them though? Like, I feel like he wasn't.
Well, I mean, they helped. They definitely helped.
All right.
Substantially, I would say. And they also have a very limited funding and resources. And if they had like 1,000 more employees, I bet you they'd have released even more people.
I'm not trying to talk shit on them. I'm just saying, like, they were stopped at every turn, like,
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah, I'm sure there's hundreds more where they have been trying, but they're getting stopped by DAs, getting stopped by judges. So it's like almost like a freak chance, a crazy chance when it goes through.
Yeah, that's wild.
When they're actually listened to. So Patrick has still never been exonerated. He's still convicted. The conviction is upheld. It's never been overturned. And apparently they are still working on that. And they have websites and stuff like that. But he is at least out despite the governor's chances. And like, I don't want to like shit talk on victims' families. And it's very sad and fucking horrific.
And also very complicated.
Yeah. And I wish this one was as kind of close, what's the word? Shut and
like cut
close,
and dry.
Yeah, cut and dry. I want to be like close and shut, close.
I know what you're trying to say. I can't think of it either, but yeah.
Yeah, I want it to be
shut.
that
Open and
shut. I wanted it to be as open and shut as like Michael Morton's case, where the other guy was like fully convicted for it. Because then it's like, okay, perfect. I mean, here we have evidence of this other guy's guilt, but he wasn't ever convicted. So that would be the way to like really be like, okay, here we go.
Yeah, because this is only like a half. It's
halfway
not even
there.
And it's also
like
not even a happy ending because he spent 25 years in prison. That's not
and
like
he still has like a super terrible conviction on his record. Like it's gonna be hard to get a job, hard to get an apartment.
Yeah.
So yeah, it sucks. And again, I don't want to like blame the daughter who's gone through something really horrible or disrespect her, but it sucks that this is how.
I mean, I do want to go back to the fact that he hits women, so like kind of fuck this guy.
Yeah, and that's why. Yeah, and it's like, and I'm sure he's like reformed and done great and is great, but it's like either way, in 1997, you're being a dick as of that moment, and it makes it, I think, quite easy. Not easy, but like it is like
kind of logical,
conceivable, right? And it's also like. It is harder when someone's not a total 100% good person to be like, look, domestic violence, you can put it in this box, but he probably didn't do this murder. Like it is harder to like separate that. Like someone can be a dick or shitty husband or an abusive fuck and not
be a murderer. Yeah, there's a big difference. There's a big leap there. There's a big leap there.
Yeah. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, it's really interesting too because there are this case is because it's so unresolved, I think, and people feel strongly like literally it's almost split like 40-60 or 50-50 of like the headlines will read like innocent, wrongly convicted black man fucking in jail for 25 years, finally freed, or there's literally just as many headlines that say like pregnant Indigenous woman brutal killing, gone undrugged, or like the brutal killer of pregnant Indigenous woman goes free. You know what I mean? Like the way it can be phrased totally opposite. And there's just as many articles talking about him as if he for sure fucking did it and this is a miscarriage of justice as there are articles saying he was innocent.
Oh, God.
So
what I hate is how easy it is for things to get misconstrued and to become about things that they're not really about.
Yeah.
And people will do that. They use catchy headlines and, topics to kind of change the reality. And it's like, yes, he's a black man. Yes, she's an Indigenous woman. Those things are important to discuss. But like the facts of the case are what they are, like regardless.
Right.
And it needs to be looked at that way.
You can't like, you have to do justice to both of them, right? Like you have to do justice against the person that's correct to do justice against and justice for the victim. You know what I mean? Like you can't like feel so strongly about Indigenous, women being murdered that you just convict anyone.
That your judgment is clouded. And that's exactly what the people who want him in prison are doing. And the people who want him out are probably doing something of the same, and neither one of them are actually just like talking about like what actually is. And it's frustrating.
Yeah. And honestly, just purely on an evidence, quote unquote, like basis, I don't think he did it.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, yeah. And also like to be fair, like we don't know what happened on those domestic calls either. It could have been like yelling and screaming and throwing things. It could have been, we don't fucking know. We don't know. And it's hard to say. So, this is a fucking complicated ass case.
But I just thought the Gavin Newsom moment would make you scream. So.
Yeah. Fuck him. All right, what are we doing next week?
Oh yeah, I wanted to do keep the love in the air because you're so romantic and you love love.
So romantic. I forgot it was Valentine's Day. I was like, Diva, are we recording? You're like, no. I was like, oh.
Yeah. No, we like to do Valentine's Day. We had to eat seafood. Which was really good. I want to do killer couples. That's romantic.
That's cute.
And it was an OG episode of ours that is long since down, and we can do a much better job now. Do some heavy hitter, big cases.
Yeah, I'm excited.
I might do like one big one like lesser known.
Middle. Yeah, let me know because we can each do a bigger one, a smaller one, and split them up so our episodes are good. Anyway, okay, that's what we'll do next week. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you soon. And until the next episode,
stay
off our... Stay off them.